will have 15 minutes Q&A. So pose your questions by writing it in the Q&A session just below. Don't waste this opportunity. So on João, an award-winning wireless engineer, an academic leader, and a passionate entrepreneur. João loves to turn complex theorems and algorithms into products and services that can make real difference in people's lives. After more than a decade developing new wireless network technologies at Technische Universität München, Universidade do Porto, the MIT and the Carnegie Mellon, João founded an award-winning venture-backed startup, Veniam, where he serves as CEO. His work has led to 160 science and technology papers, as well as featured articles by NPR, BBC, MIT Technology Review, The Atlantic, and TechCrunch. It is a great pleasure to have João joining us and sharing his insights and experience. So João, go ahead.
Anna, thank you so much for the introduction. I now feel very, very old, but so far so good. So a pleasure to be here, and thank you to E-Bynd and you, Anna, for the invitation. And I see we have 35 participants, so please keep those questions coming, and I'll do my best to answer them. So the topic is B2B enterprise sales. I hope everyone can hear me and see me well. So Anna just froze here.
All good, all good.
Perfect. I will continue then. And so I was thinking, you know, in the early days of Veniam, so that was about 8 years ago, I was coming from the university. I was a professor, as Anna was pointing out, and had no idea about business or sales or actually anything about commerce. You see, my parents worked for the government, so my father was a judge and my mother was a teacher. So in my house, nobody ever talked about money. I mean, there was enough for books and toys and food and education, and that was it. And so it was even a little bit of poor taste to talk about money. So I grew up, you know, with this notion actually that you know, you're very, very privileged to have an education, and so you should give back to society. And so I did my PhD and I became a professor, and I thought that that was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And then the economic crisis hit Portugal, and suddenly everything I thought was true, namely that, you know, the government is able to support us, and if we are able to build, you know, a science and technology system, and I can contribute to that, then I will be fulfilling my mission, and I will be training people for the industry, and I'll do that for the rest of my life. But suddenly the world changed. We had the Euro crisis, and there was no more financing, very little financing for science, and all my students were really, really depressed. So this was back in 2011. It seems like a really long time ago, but some of what we're seeing or are going to see over the next coming months, unfortunately, will remind us of that time where jobs were scarce and it was really hard to see where the economy and where the future was going. And so on Christmas 2011, I invited my PhD students and postdocs to come to my house, about 16 people, and everyone was so depressed that I thought, okay, I have to do something. And so I told him, you know, 2012 is going to be the year where we're going to take all the amazing technologies that you guys developed over the last few years, and we're going to bring it to the market. And I have no idea how to do that, but in January, we will start. And I had no idea how hard it was going to be. I just knew that it was time also to try out what it's like to go from theorems to papers to prototypes to products to a working business that is able to generate growth, create more jobs, generate more innovation. I was really, really curious about that side of things, and my students needed jobs. So it was a no-brainer then to think, okay, let's do this and try to figure out, how can we navigate that valley of death of bringing a new technology to the market in a way that is successful from a business point of view. And what I knew was that as a professor, I had no idea about business at all, and so I needed to surround myself with people who did know something about it. And in 2011, I was a visiting professor at MIT, and they invited me to give a talk about our work. And at the time, what we were doing was basically building the first networks of vehicles in the world. So what Veniam has is a software that enables vehicles to talk with each other and do the infrastructure in a very dynamic way. And I'll show you in a moment. And I was giving this talk at MIT about our first experiments with taxis in Porto, Portugal at the time. And a lady from Untitled Capital happened to be in the audience, and she came to me and she said, Professor, it's really exciting what you're doing. You have to do two things. One is you have to start a company, and two, you have to talk with Robin Chase. And I had no idea who Robin was, but I looked her up online, and turns out that Robin was the founder and CEO of Zipcar, which was the largest car sharing company in the world at the time, that then got sold to Avis for about $500 million. And more importantly, I found a TED Talk from Robin Chase from 2007, where Robin said that every vehicle should be a Wi-Fi hotspot. They should connect with each other in a mesh network and provide free internet to everybody. And so she was already doing that or talking about that in 2007. And in 2011, we were actually doing that in Porto, first with taxis and later with buses and garbage collection trucks and other vehicles. And so the lady from Untitled Capital, so Lila Partridge, then wrote a funny email to Robin and said, the answer to a question you asked me 3 years ago. And the question was, do you know anyone who knows how to build networks of vehicles? And I happened to be consulting for Cisco in California at the time during the summer, and I received an email from Robin and saying, hey, I was told that you're in California right now. I'm going to be in Palo Alto tomorrow. Can you meet me for coffee? And I immediately said yes, and we met for 2 hours at a little cafe in the train station of Palo Alto. And it's a typical Silicon Valley story, even though none of us was in Silicon Valley. But after 2 hours, it was friendship at first sight. And we had a sketch of Veniam's business plan. And I never forget, and then she said, and now we talk with the VCs. Of course, she was joking because it was way too soon to be talking with VCs, but we knew we had an idea, at least a very, very disruptive way to look at vehicles. So not just machines that transport people and goods from one point to the other, but actually as part of the wireless infrastructure, as part of the internet, as part of a smart city ecosystem, where vehicles gather data, provide connectivity, and are able to improve the quality of life of millions of people. And so fast forward 8 years, and Veniam right now sells intelligent networking software to major automakers around the world. Obviously, we're hard hit right now by the COVID-19 crisis because, as you know, the auto industry is basically in induced coma right now. It will take several months for them to restart production, then several months to figure out what the consumers are going to do. Right now, they're not buying cars, and probably another few months to really re-engage on the types of R&D efforts that we were doing. So we find ourselves, 8 years later, to some extent, back at a stage where we have to be very, very creative around our sales, very, very creative around our product, reorganize ourselves to some extent, to be able to navigate the waters, and of course make sure that we don't in any way run out of cash before we're able to achieve full-scale production and get our software into millions of vehicles. And from that respect, I actually welcome the opportunity to just browse with you on a few of the lessons that we learned, because it kind of reactivates the part of my neural network that is required right now, together with our amazing team, to be able to find a path in what for sure is going to be a very difficult time and challenging time for all of us, but at the same time where I'm absolutely certain that there are hidden opportunities to uncover, provided that we stay curious and we continue to explore. And so looking back at the beginnings, I was obviously learning, and we did the Building Global Innovators Accelerator promoted by MIT Portugal. It was a great experience, and where essentially all the teachers and instructors encouraged us to go outside and talk with cameras and figure it out. And once we started doing that, we realized that all the ideas that we had of what our technology was about were basically just 5% of the business success. Why? Because you need all these layers of product on top of that, then layers of marketing, then layers of sales, and until you finally are able to get a deal, it's a long path, especially if you're dealing with large companies and enterprises, which in our case was first companies with large commercial fleets, and then later automobile makers, as I mentioned before. And so when I think about what presentations were the most useful to me at the time as an entrepreneur, for sure, I'm reminded of all the very practical case studies, and less reminded of the theory behind entrepreneurship. So I'm not going to talk much about the theory behind entrepreneurship, also because I really don't know much about the theory of entrepreneurship. What I want to provide you today, and hopefully it will be of some value to you, is a walk through different attempts that we did, what worked, what didn't work, what we learned along the way of dealing with very large enterprises, trying to sell a platform as a B2B solution, and obviously with a business model that could scale to millions of vehicles and ultimately hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. We're not nearly there, so we're still very much a tech startup in incubation. So a big disclaimer here is that I'm won't be able to point to one full complete cycle all the way to production. So we're very close to that, but I'll be able to get you to some extent into the door of the enterprise from our perspective with the things that we learned. And hopefully some of these strategies and some of these tactics will be useful to you as you figure out, what is my product, who are my customers, how do I get into the door, how do I move past their barriers and objections, and how ultimately do I close an initial project, and how do I find my way into the right pricing strategy, and ultimately how do I close an enterprise deal. All right, so long introduction. What I will do is right now share with you one of our earliest decks, and it's almost embarrassing to look at it right now from the vantage point of 2020. But one very important thing for entrepreneurs is never be afraid to embarrass yourself. So that's rule number one: never be afraid to embarrass yourself. As long as you're earnest and you're sincere and you do your best, good things will happen. And also, I think perhaps if I may be just a little bit more philosophical at the beginning, never make your self-worth be dependent on your success, because there are so many things that don't depend on us at all. And maybe that's the advantage of being 43 versus 23, is that when you get to 43, life has taught you enough lessons that that there are just way too many things that you don't control, like a virus. And so never have your self-worth be dependent on that, and keep going. So I think that those things are really important. So let me try to share the screen and share with you one of the very first slide decks that we presented, which was a mix of fundraising and customer slide deck. And you're going to see that this first slide deck is very visionary and points at different areas. And then you're going to see that as you come closer and closer to product market fit and figuring out what it is that you want to sell, and you have something that is replicable, where you do the first customer and then you can replicate with other customers, that things become much more specific and much more detailed. But I thought it would be nice for us to actually take a look at what a deck from the early days, where we were still looking for product market fit and for investment, looked like. And so I'm going to share with you that deck now. All right, can you see it? Hopefully. And I'm going to put full screen. All right.
All good.
Okay, so this is the vintage logo of Veniam. So this was our first logo back in this deck is from 2014, so 6 years ago. And at the time, you know, what we were promoting as our vision was an internet of vehicles, but later on we realized that what we were really after was the internet of moving things. So that was one key step at one point in time. I remember I was presenting to a customer and he said, why just vehicles? And I started thinking, yeah, our technology applies not just to cars, buses, and trucks, but also to robots, drones, industrial machines. So anything that moves that needs to talk with each other in the infrastructure. But we started with vehicles. And so the first idea was to say there are 1 billion vehicles in the world, and actually only 6% of them are connected to the internet. So imagine if 1 billion vehicles are connected to the internet. And I'm not going to do the entire presentation, but I just wanted to point out, you know, what I find really, really important in engaging with large companies is that you have a big vision. You already know this from fundraising and VCs. With enterprise customers, it's the same, because you are going to have to catch the interest of this organization at very different levels, from the engineers that are implementing their software, in our case, all the way to the CEO. And so you need a messaging that is very much built in a pyramid, where you have like a big idea, something that people can immediately fall in love with and catch, and matters obviously to their business. And so the CEO is not thinking about, you know, how does this software module gonna fit into my platform? Maybe not even the CTO is thinking about that. Maybe just the VP of engineering, maybe just the head architect. They are thinking about, you know, where is the market going? What technologies do I need to differentiate myself? And my presentation is going to be a lot about tech companies, because that's the only thing I really understand a little bit about. But it's this idea that, okay, you have a product or a service that can be differentiating for their business and ultimately also create value for their customers. And there are only two ways that they look at this. So either you enable them to make more money, or you enable them to save money. So those are the two reasons why they're going to be doing business with you. So vision alone doesn't help. You need to be able to show specifically, you know, what are they going to do with your technology. And so imagine all the things that you could do. And so in our case, you know, we looked at fleets like buses. And right now, this at the time was a concept picture. Today, every single public bus in Porto has Veniam's solution to provide Wi-Fi to passengers. Same thing with buses in Singapore, some buses in New York as well. And at the time, this was just, you know, a slide with with PowerPoint on top. And so this was literally pictures that we just took from the internet. We pasted it together. I did all this stack, you know, pretty much by myself at the time. And basically, you know, those were the areas. And as I mentioned before, we had the technology looking for a market. And so we were firing or sending our ideas into many different directions, right? And so please listen to Anna and put questions here, and I'll proceed. And so we didn't know exactly which one was going to be our beachhead, so our first market, so we were trying different things. And then you have to find, okay, what are their pains? What are the things that, you know, will allow them to make more money or save money? And in this case, the problem that they had at the time was connectivity. Is that all that they were doing was putting SIM cards into these devices, into these cars, and these vehicles, And that was tremendously expensive because traffic was going to grow dramatically, networks were getting more congestion. It was very, very expensive. And so being able to use not just cellular, but also Wi-Fi and the ability of vehicles to communicate with each other enabled them to lower their data costs by offloading data from one network to the other. And this is interesting both for the fleets and also for the telecom operators. And that brings me to a different topic, which is ecosystems. So most products and most business models today actually rely on an ecosystem that is built, be it, an app store and a smartphone and apps, or in our case, telecom operators, fleets, and device makers. So these are, and then of course, part of this ecosystem, the passengers. And so fast forward 8 years, our customers are not buses, but are automakers, and automakers, of course, want to provide connected solutions, apps, and so on to their drivers and passengers. So we have to think about those groups as well, and how are they going to benefit from our technology. So then we define ourselves as a vehicle networking company. We turn cars, trucks, and buses into Wi-Fi hotspots. We build a mesh network of vehicles, and we transfer your data cheaply. So, and very quickly, so what are the benefits? Okay, transfer data cheaply and reliably. So security is also a big deal, to and from the cloud. Okay, so super simple. Everyone gets it. And so if you only get like the famous elevator pitch, if you only get 10 seconds or 15 seconds, everyone understands what you're doing. And they see, oh, wow. So I never thought of vehicles as Wi-Fi hotspots. That's new, that's different, and that's catchy. Is that what we do today? No. So we're moving massive amounts of data between vehicles and the cloud. But the idea of, a vehicle as a Wi-Fi hotspot, or a vehicle as part of the internet, or a vehicle as a wireless machine, that is something that people can remember. By the way, at some point we dropped the works and we called ourselves only Veniam. The reason it was Veniam Works was because we couldn't get Veniam.com. When I was finally able to buy Veniam.com, or I don't know, it was like 1,000 euros, something like that. Then we got Veniam alone. And Veniam means I will arrive in Latin. So we will get there. We will find a way, or we will make one. All right. At the time, we were still doing hardware. It seemed like a really good idea, because when we tried to buy devices, everything was $3,000 or more. And our friends in Aveiro, my co-founder, Susana Sargento, who's a professor there, she and her team were able to build a device that only cost $200. And then we said, okay, that's a big difference, so let's do hardware. It was as naive as that. I mean, we were extremely naive. We learned later that doing hardware is extremely difficult, and we're now in a 100% software company. But it was really important for us to have our own devices and to learn. And so another important thing is that in the beginning of your venture, you are going to do a lot of things that are just experiments for you to learn. And some of them are really expensive, like hardware is really expensive. So we did spend a couple of millions learning that lesson, but it gave us a know-how and an IP in terms of how to design software for this type of embedded devices that is priceless, because there are very few people in the world that actually know how to do that for this type of wireless communications. Here are my co-founders. And so Robin, Chase, and Roy Russell, who came from Zipcar, Suzanne, as I mentioned. Maria João was not a co-founder, but she was our early managing director and helped me also avoid many of the pitfalls in building a company. So, we started firing in all the different directions. And typically, the image that people use is that first you use a machine gun, and then when you hear a metal noise, that means you hit the boat, and then you put a big cannon, against that boat. And so we're still in the machine gun, trying to, I think I must smile thinking back at those times, because at the time we honestly thought we could do it all, which is insane. I think the other harder lesson was focus, 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 focus. And I remember one of our, we were very lucky to be able to close Series A with very, very experienced, well-known VCs. So True Ventures in Silicon Valley and Union Square Ventures in New York. And I remember Brad Burnham, one of the founding partners Union Square Ventures, for years he kept telling me, you know, focus, focus, focus. If you think you're already too focused, focus more. And it took us 6 years to actually understand the importance of focus. But we did have the initial success in ports and some public transportation, and we figured out that, you know, for this ecosystem to work, you need a value proposition, not just for your direct customer, in this case, the buses, but actually for the telecom operators. Everybody has to win. And that's a big lesson, because typically, you know, we think that, you know, just focus on the customer, but focusing on the ecosystem is really important, because otherwise somebody is going to try to kill your B2B deal. And so the first question that I have here is what are your advice to founders that don't have background in sales and marketing to go back to school and train their skills, or to hire commercial staff from the very beginning? Great question. It was really, really hard to find salespeople for this part of the journey, because salespeople like to have a product that is already very stable, with a very clear business model, very repeatable. They go and they sell to A, B, and C, and down, 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 down. This type of business development where you're still discovering and you're pitching and you fail a lot of times and you correct and you go back, what you really need is really super strong product management in this phase of it. And product management is probably one of the most underestimated functions. Certainly here in the Portuguese ecosystem, is not something that we do very well. I think there are more and more companies that are learning how to do that. I think, so several things that I think are really important. One is to be super curious, learn as much as possible. Then whether you like people or not, building a coalition of goodwill, of people who like you and like your company and want you to succeed, is really, really important, because you never know where leads are going to come, where ideas are going to come. And so talking with a lot of people and building your network is really important. For me, it was not so difficult, because I was already doing that in academia. So I had a very rewarding academic career before, which relied a lot also on getting to know scientists from all different universities and also companies. I used to work also a lot with companies even before starting Veniam. And so building that your own social coalition is really important for the success of your company. And then you learn, ask, and talk. So I always felt that for me to overcome a learning curve, it was better to have a mentor and somebody that had done it before and kind of benefit from their wisdom than to do academic courses. Having said that, the Building Global Innovators accelerators, I think there are plenty of really good ones and are helpful. And then my wife says I learn from other people, but I spend a lot of time studying, and it's true. I'm also a scientist at heart, so I also like to go deep into things. So I read a lot, and right now I'm totally in love with my subscription of masterclass.com, because you get, you know, a bunch of hours with excellent, outstanding people in many different areas. So that's the other thing, is that if you want to learn about marketing, you know, learn how to communicate. You know, learn how to write well, how to speak well, how to learn about creativity. So masterclass.com has amazing lessons from all different sorts of people. So like one of the best ones, for example, for product that I found was a masterclass on investigative journalism by Bob Woodward from the Washington Post. And again, it has nothing to do with product management, but it was about how do you get information out of people? How do you investigate? How do you build a story? How do you build a narrative? And so telling a story, I would say, is the most important thing in all of this, for fundraising, for sales, and so. So coming up with the story and storytelling, and it's something that is not necessarily very natural for engineers, and I'm an engineer by training, but again, I come from a family of humanities, so I was kind of pushed to long arcs and long narratives and telling stories. So that's really, really important. So I'll move a little bit further, but basically I would advise regarding sales people, wait until you have product market fit to hire salespeople, and then put the salespeople on a mission to grow a business that you know already works. And you only know it works when you have several customers that are paying you, on predictable revenue terms. And that's really hard. One of the big mistakes we did was to think with the fleets that we already had product market fit before we had it. So I hired salespeople, I scaled the business, I opened an office in Singapore and so on, because we thought that, we had success in Porto, we had success with fleets in Singapore. Now this is going to scale worldwide. And it turns out that the fleets, we were too early at the time for them. Offering Wi-Fi to passengers was not a top priority at the time, and getting more data than just the position was not a priority. 5 years later, things changed completely. They're putting lots of cameras into the vehicles, have tons of data they need to send, and they can use our software to save 60% of the data cost. But I wouldn't scale a sales team before you really know that your business is working. So it's a lot about the founders doing much of this work, and product managers again. All right, then figuring out the business model, as I mentioned, ecosystem. When I look at this slide right now, way too complicated, way too complicated. So keep it super simple, super simple. So, we help you save money with data costs, and we get 30% of their savings, let's say. So that's a simple business model, simple story. Or we charge you $2 per vehicle per month, okay, and we send you 3 times as much data. Okay, so that's a simple story, simple business model. But again, I think for those of you who are in academia or come from academia or come from research, we are trained to deal with very complex systems and very complex stories. And engineers are trained to deal with big complexity. Business is actually very simple. It's hard, but it's simple. The simplest the story, the simplest the conversations, the better. Anna, go ahead.
João, well, we would like to ask you one thing that you would like to have done differently, because we want to learn from you.
Sure. As I always said, I would have hired salespeople much later in the journey. So definitely not in year 2 or 3, way too early for us. I'd probably wait until we're generating $1 million predictably before we did that. It was only much later that we were able to generate that.
So learn by doing.
I think as an entrepreneur, it's like if you're not a generalist yourself, you need to surround yourself with generalists that are able to do different things. I think the CEO needs to be able to think strategically and be able to tell a story very well, and tell the same story in different ways. Because the way that you tell it to investors is different from the way that you tell it to customers, different from the way that you tell it to your team. And you want to be truthful and honest with all of them. At the same time, they have different contexts, different expectations. And so you have to match their needs with the story that you need to tell. But I would say, so what would we have done? I would have scaled much, much, much slower. One of the best advices that I got that I didn't always follow was raise way more money than you need, and then don't spend anything. And so I did raise way more money than we needed, but especially after Series B, we thought we had a working business, and we scaled, we hired a lot of people, and we were not able to achieve our goals, and had to pivot, change to the auto industry, and had to give up hardware. And so lots of things that I thought I knew were just not true. And so always second guess yourself. So that's the other thing. So not second guess others. Don't do that. So empower people, let them do their work, choose wisely, and then let them do their work. And this is not always easy, because as a founder, you have to let go of a lot of things, but second guess yourself. I'm always, these days, I have way, way, way more doubts than I'm certain about anything. And that's helpful. So that's the thing. I think you have to be very confident that that you're going to succeed one way or the other. We'll find a way, or we will make one. But I think it's really important, and I try to not take anything for granted and not assume that I know anything. the things that I don't know are way, way, way more than the things. And actually, Ray Dalio says, the things that you need to know are way more than the ones that, so it's not just the things that you don't know, it's the things that you need to know. And the worst things are the things that you don't know. And I'll give a few more examples as we go along of what are the things that we thought we knew when we
well, just for housekeeping reasons, we have 7 more minutes. There are 2 questions in the pipe. Yeah, it's great listening to your story, but time goes by. We have 2 other questions in the pipeline. One is very specific from Raul Flamenco from the US. That I don't know whether you would like to address quickly. How do you cook?
Sure.
Yeah. And then we would move to Rolando Silva. So could you go with Raul? How do you cooperate with SD1 and security companies? And if you do.
I didn't get the first one, sorry. The
SD1 and security companies, how do you deal with them?
Yeah, so security is a big topic for us. So we absolutely have to address that. And so basically, we provide end-to-end security. And so we ensure that from the vehicle all the way to the cloud and back, you have a secure pipeline. But we're also very clear on what are the parts of security that we don't touch. For example, one big thing for car makers is over-the-air software updates. And so be able to have a piece of code that goes into the car. And for example, in Tesla's case, just adds a feature or increases the range of your vehicle, things like that, or makes the brakes work better. So we are very specific that we do not ensure the security of that code. We only ensure the end-to-end. So providing the boundaries for security of what are you responsible for and what don't you, it's really important to be very, very clear. We don't collaborate directly with them. We basically just say which part of the security do we address.
Okay, so thank you. And we have this question from Roland, given the number of parties involved and the differentiation that you do between needs, wants, services, and revenues.
Very good.
Complex situations, we've heard.
Well, very, very good point. So the way that we narrowed it down was to do as much over the top, so over the infrastructure as we could. Meaning that we don't ask telecom operators to change anything on their network. We tried, it takes years, and you run out of money before you achieve it. So telecom operators are really, really hard to work with. And so essentially what we said is, hey, we'll generate more traffic for your networks, and we don't require you to change anything. And that kind of solved that piece. And then for the car makers, it's a 4-year process to get software into new models and be able to also operate in their cloud and do that. So to be able to do a business like that with any of this type of companies, telecom operators, automakers, and so on, you need a huge amount of capital. So that's the thing to go into, is that if you think that you're going to be able with an angel round, to generate, either it's, an app or something like that, that might work, but anything that touches infrastructure and so on, or enterprise software that also forces companies to change their workflows or something like that, that's going to require a lot of time and a lot of scrutiny. And so in terms of business model, essentially, today, we just charge a fixed fee per vehicle per month. And our software allows them to either get more data for the same price or pay less for the data that they're able to get. And that's a very, very simple way to do that. And then comes the next thing. Once they buy the first thing, then you upsell cloud-based services, for example, for security management.
Now we're really approaching the end. You either need to simplify or shorten your sales cycle, says Roland, just to clarify.
Yeah, but most importantly, you have to find the right people inside of the organization, because what makes the cycle long is the time that you need to navigate and get everybody who needs to say yes to say yes, and those who can say no not to say no. And so minimizing as much as possible the time that it takes to find the right people. And then there's physics to the business that you can't do anything against. And hustle. But our experience has been that they will take their time to make the decisions.
Well, we need to finish, and I would like to ask you a final question. Time goes by, particularly with you. And you've mentioned pivoting as being very important. Currently, under the circumstances, tell us a bit about that, a bit more, and what we should expect. And remember, under the current circumstances, talking to our B2B companies that are listening to us now.
Sure. So the number one thing is don't run out of cash. So companies die because they run out of cash. And so that's like the number one thing is you have to ensure that you have a runway, and right now at least 24 months. And this is across the board. I'm not saying you anything new. This is what all the startups in the portfolios of our VCs and investors are doing right now, is making sure that they have that, because it's very unlikely that there will be investment available for most companies over the next 18 months to 24 months. And so that's number one thing. And then what we did was the automakers are going to take 12 months or more to do what they promised to do this year. And so we tried to look at other companies that are doing well. Can we offer something to them? And what companies are doing well right now? Delivery fleets. Delivery fleets are doing great. Amazon is doing great. UPS is doing great, and so on. So we started engaging with them and realized, oh, now they have these devices that send a lot of data. And so can we now sell something to them? So we're in the process of doing that. We were lucky because we raised a round of financing last year. And so we weren't like, but just in general, I panic when I don't have 1 year of salaries. So I follow the Bill Gates rule, is a full year of salaries always. So as soon as I start getting to 18, 19 months of runway, I start thinking, okay, I have to figure something out, because you don't want to be fundraising with little cash. It will crush your valuation and everything. And so it's a very boring answer, I know, but cash, 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 cash. And then just in general, I think companies exist for a purpose. I think right now we will have many opportunities to improve the lives of people, to make them safer, to help people return to work, to help them cope with this very, very difficult situation. So whatever technology, whatever product, whatever service, if you are helping people live better, then you are going to find a business model. That's my belief, but I can't prove it. It's just faith.
I know, João, knowing you and Anna, your wife, and how important that is to you both. To me, would expect you to finish like that. To the audience, it may be new, but it's also something that it's a very important lesson to take. João, it was a real great pleasure. Thank you very much. Take care. And we'll meet sometime. Thank you very much.
Sure, always a pleasure.
Francisco.
Thank you very, very much, and good luck to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.